Mabuhay. Welcome to Lagim, a Filipino True Crime Podcast with me, Christine. Every 2 weeks, I bring you stories of infamous crimes committed in the Philippines. Before I start today's episode, I would like to ask you to please follow us on Instagram at Lagim Podcast and on Twitter at Lagim Pod. We are also on Facebook, just search for Lagim, a Filipino True Crime Podcast, and on TikTok at Lagim Podcast. Please also rate Lagim on Apple Podcasts to help give this little passion project of mine a bit of a boost. Now, this is part 2 of the Eileen Sarmenta and Allan Gomez story. So if you haven't heard part 1, please go back to the previous episode in order to follow the story and then come back for this one. Content warning. This episode contains details of rape, murder, assault, and torture. So make sure that you take care of yourself whilst listening to this episode. Where we left off last week, we heard about Centeno's testimony, which directly implicated the mayor of Calauan, Mayor Antonio Sanchez, and 6 other men. In this episode, we will hear the story put forward by the mayor and the 6 men, which later formed part of their defense in court. Mayor Sanchez started his story with an account of his day on the 28th of June and on the 29th of June 1993. He described a fairly normal routine, spending time with his mistress, heading to Makati and then San Pablo, Laguna, eating meals, going for a jog, and bidding his 3 children with his mistress goodbye before they went off to school. Now, I know what you're thinking, but I'm not going to comment on the mayor having a mistress as it is not relevant to our story, but I get why your brows may be raised right now. Moving on, the mayor testified that Medialdea, Ama, and Malabanan arrived around 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the 29th of June at his property in Bay Laguna. They informed him of what had happened to Eileen and Allan, further informing him that a certain Kit Alquesa was the prime suspect. The mayor stated that he was angered by this horrible news and ordered that a thorough investigation be conducted immediately. He said he did not care for the rank or status of the perpetrator or perpetrators, as he will equally have them executed through the electric chair. This was alluding to Kit Alquesa's family. Alquesa is the son of a feared general who earned the moniker Barako, Tagalog word for wild boar, essentially denoting a feared and powerful persona. The mayor then testified that after the visit by Medialdea and the others, he went to his home in Calauan and ordered his personal driver to visit the barangays or little towns of Maslit and Balayhangin. He wanted him to ask around about the crime he just heard about, which seems like an odd thing to order since such a task should surely be left to the police investigators, but I digress at this moment. His driver went ahead and came back the same evening, informing the mayor that he had spoken to some residents who talked about a local card gambler who apparently retrieved a pair of white shorts lying near the national highway in Balayhangin. The mayor then ordered his driver to go back to the residents and ask them to perhaps hang the shorts on their fence near the highway so that investigators may spot them later on whilst doing their work. Again, an odd request, I must admit. I would think that such a vital piece of information would immediately be passed on to the investigators instead of hoping that they may just spot them at random. After this eventful day, the mayor then recounted his day on the 30th of June 1993. He said that he and some friends jogged towards Barangay Mabacan where Eileen's body and the Tamarao van were found. Upon arriving in Mabacan, he and his companions asked residents whether they have noticed anything odd these past few days and nights, and then a man came forward saying that he found a pair of jeans by the side of the road. The mayor thought this to be an important piece of evidence and asked the man to keep the jeans safe as the mayor would be sending someone over to pick them up. It is not clear from the court documents and my research whether the mayor meant that a police officer would probably pass by to collect this evidence, or whether he was thinking of sending his own people to collect the pair of jeans. At some point, the mayor had both the pair of white shorts and the pair of jeans in his possession. Again, it is not clear why he suddenly wanted the shorts with him, since he earlier advised his driver to tell the residents of Mabacan to hang the shorts on their fences to alert investigators. The mayor then testified that when he had both items, the shorts were clean with complete belt loops and without any tear. This detail would later become important, so put a pin on that. The mayor then ordered his driver to take both items to Medialdea, who, just as a reminder, was still the deputy chief of the police force at Calauan. Medialdea, as we already heard in part 1, handed the shorts over to Major Canyo. So, where does Kit Alquesa come into all of this? We know that the mayor stated that Medialdea informed him that Alquesa was a primary suspect at the very early stages of the investigation, but it is not clear how anyone had landed upon Alquesa as a suspect in the first place. We only know that Alquesa was part of the same fraternity as Allan Gomez and was acquainted with Eileen. But how did the mayor know of Alquesa? Well, the mayor presumably knew of Alquesa not only by his father's reputation, but also because Alquesa was part of the SK, or Sangguniang Kabataan, a kind of youth council that gives a voice to a town's young people. Fact is, Alquesa was indeed investigated earlier on after Eileen and Allan were discovered. I presume that students at Los Baños may have given investigators reason to suspect Alquesa as someone who was rumored to be Eileen's ex-boyfriend and therefore a potential suspect. And the mayor latched on to this. The mayor maintained that Alquesa was undoubtedly involved, as he was known to be a feared and dangerous student at UPLB. He had blood relations to the local congressman, who apparently admitted to Mayor Sanchez himself that Alquesa went into hiding in his own house, the house of the congressman, that is. Furthermore, the mayor's suspicion was strengthened when both the Corcolon men were arrested, with the mayor's help no less. Both men were arrested on the suspicion of raping and killing Eileen, and both implicated Kit Alquesa. However, after questioning and after passing a polygraph test, Alquesa was dropped as a suspect. Now fast forward to August of 1993. Mayor Sanchez said he received a phone call telling him in no uncertain terms to leave the country because he had now become a suspect in the Sarmenta and Gomez killings, and therefore would be arrested imminently. The mayor said that he refused to listen to the anonymous caller and was indeed arrested then on the 13th of August 1993. When later asked about Centeno and Malabanan testifying against him, the mayor claimed that both men were tortured and their testimonies were given under duress in order to frame him. Now, as you can imagine, the defense's narrative in court would later on hinge largely on what the mayor said, and the testimonies of the other accused men that lined up with what the mayor said. Take Medialdea, for example. His testimony aligned with Centeno up until the events after they stopped at the filling station in Calauan. Medialdea testified that after a fruitless search operation for the drug pusher called Tisoy, someone I already mentioned in the first episode, the search team retired and dispersed around 9 p.m. Medialdea then said he joined his wife at some friend's place to play a game of mahjong and then went to bed. He woke up around 5 o'clock in the morning to continue the search for Tisoy. Medialdea said that the accused men, excluding of course the mayor and Centeno, met again and started their search for Tisoy in Barangay Imok, where they briefly saw Tisoy and fired at him whilst he was speeding away on a motorcycle. It was then that they heard someone report on the radio that a dead body had been found in Sitio Paputok near Barangay Mabacan. Medialdea stated that he then radioed Centeno to fetch the group and drive them over to the said location. Medialdea confirmed that they then saw Eileen's body in the Tamarao van when they arrived. He said that contrary to previous reports, Major Canio and other police officers were already there. Medialdea then confirmed that he pulled down Eileen's rolled-up shirt to cover her chest and that he picked up several items scattered around the van like a pack of cigarettes, a paddle, shoes, and 5 bottles of beer. The van was then driven to Los Baños. Medialdea further recounted that he was ordered by the major to look for Allan, who was reported to have been seen with Eileen last. Allan was nowhere to be found. So Medialdea searched further and was given information by a local councilman or barangay tanod that if Allan also turned up dead, for sure it will be Alquesa's doing. This local councilman stated that Allan had most probably earned the ire of Kit Alquesa because Allan had hooked up with Kit Alquesa's then-girlfriend. Medialdea made sure to pass on this information to the major, only to be told that, indeed, Allan was found dead already. Medialdea, having remembered what the local councilman had told him, then told the major that Kit Alquesa should be a suspect in Allan's killing due to the rift the two students had with each other. Now, this conversation must have happened in a public place because Medialdea then claimed that after mentioning Alquesa's name, someone in the crowd then said, "That's me." It was indeed Alquesa who then apparently explained that he and Allan had sorted things out. They have managed to sort out their difference around 3 months ago. There was no bad blood between them. Whilst this conversation was happening, Medialdea said that he observed a drop of blood on the middle of Alquesa's right thigh. He asked Alquesa about it and was told that the blood drop must have transferred there from his right knuckle, which had bled earlier on after punching a wall. Now, I only had the Supreme Court document as my source for Medialdea's testimony. Of course, it would have been better to have the trial transcript because that would then explain why in the Supreme Court's document, Medialdea's testimony jumped from that moment when Alquesa first said, "That's me," in the crowd, to the part where Medialdea testified about the cleaning of the van. Now, I am risking a guess here, but I can imagine that after Alquesa tried to explain away the blood drop that Medialdea observed on his thigh, this then started the process of the police suspecting him and maybe taking him in for questioning. In the Supreme Court document, Medialdea's testimony jumped right forward to the part where he was questioned about the cleaning of the van. So we will have to proceed with that. When asked about why the police had allowed the van to be cleaned, Medialdea vehemently denied it was his idea. In fact, he said that Major Canio was the one who ordered this. He even testified that he scolded the person who was cleaning the van as he knew that doing so would greatly cast doubt and suspicion on their investigation of the case. And he would not be wrong. Medialdea, Ama, and Malabanan were later swiftly called by the Philippine National Police Command Center in Santa Cruz, Laguna, and will be questioned about the van cleaning. Medialdea said that prior to having given sworn statements to the command center, Major Canio strongly advised him to deny his involvement in ordering the cleaning. The major apparently proposed to put the blame on Malabanan, something Medialdea did not want to do. As a result, Medialdea, Ama, and Malabanan were detained until they could be formally charged. According to Medialdea, things happened pretty quickly after that. Ama, Malabanan, and him were brought to the Department of Justice where they signed a waiver of detention. Then they were led back to Laguna where they were coaxed, apparently, by high-ranking government and police officers to implicate Mayor Sanchez in the rape murder of Eileen and Allan. There was, as he said, a plan to bring down the mayor. The mayor was hated for being pro-poor. Medialdea did not much explain more of this. But he refused to implicate the mayor and instead told the high-ranking officials to investigate Kit Alquesa instead. But these officials refused to do so. According to Medialdea, investigating Kit Alquesa would be like ramming oneself into a wall. Instead, they forced Medialdea to sign a statement full of inaccuracies and lies. Whilst being detained, Medialdea further professed his innocence only to be met with verbal and physical abuse. He said that he overheard one of the high-ranking officials order his killing one evening. Of course, this did not happen, but Medialdea probably thought that this was a way to scare him into implicating the mayor. Instead, these high-ranking officials tried their luck again with Medialdea. A Colonel Versosa advised Medialdea to follow in the steps of Centeno and Malabanan in testifying against the mayor. He was reassured that if he did, he would be placed under the Witness Protection Program where he would be given an allowance, free housing, and a chance to leave the country with his family. But Medialdea said he stood his ground and refused to implicate the mayor. Around this time, Medialdea said that he had a chance to talk to Malabanan, who told him, after some coaxing, that the only reason he and Centeno testified against the mayor was because they could not stand the torture being inflicted on them anymore. Now, after reading this, it read like a bit of a conspiracy theory against the mayor. There are high-powered individuals wanting to bring down a local government official by conveniently utilizing a rape and murder case that just happened to have taken place in Calauan. My question would then be, if there had been such a desire and such a plan to bring down this little town mayor, why not try it with other means or with other crimes that may have taken place before the Sarmenta and Gomez killings? After reading a whole lot about the case, I almost feel like I was reading some sort of skeleton script for a new Jason Bourne movie, but then again, that's just my opinion. The point that I keep coming back to is that surely there are better and more efficient ways to bring down a small town mayor like Mayor Sanchez, if indeed this was the desire or intention of some high-ranking people within the local government or the police force. But I must admit that sometimes life can be stranger than fiction, and in some parallel universe or in some other time in history, this could have been a very plausible explanation as to why Mayor Sanchez was being implicated. However, knowing what the mayor had said so far and having read the excerpts of the testimonies of the other men, I remain unconvinced. Now, speaking of the other men's testimonies, they are all very similar to each other, essentially propping up and supporting the timeline and the testimony that Mayor Sanchez had given to the police and later on as his defense in trial. Now, although the testimony of the other men were all very similar to each other, supporting the mayor's timeline, and of course his testimony, one testimony did stand out to me because it made a clear connection between Allan, Kit Alquesa, and perhaps Eileen. And this would be the testimony of Luis Corcolon. Corcolon's timeline of events obviously coincided with Medialdea and the mayor's story, as I already said. But amongst the other men being accused, his testimony specifically implicated Alquesa, therefore casting reasonable doubt on the prosecution's case. He testified that on the 25th of June 1993, three men went to his home in Mabacan and told him that their boss, a man called Edgardo Lavadia, wanted to see him the next day. Now, Edgardo Lavadia was a friend of Luis's, but was also known to be a professional forger of checks. Coincidentally, Lavadia was then protected by none other than General Alquesa, Kit Alquesa's father. Luis the next day then obliged and visited Lavadia around 2 o'clock on the 26th of June 1993. There, he saw not only Lavadia but also Kit Alquesa. Lavadia, oddly enough, asked him to abduct Allan Gomez because apparently Allan had done something wrong to Alquesa. Luis asked what exactly Allan did and then suggested that if it is just a small matter, then they better drop the issue instead of abducting Allan. Lavadia, however, insisted that Allan be abducted. Luis felt uncomfortable with this prospect and feared that he might get in trouble for being involved in an abduction. After a moment, Lavadia then amended his request. He asked Luis if he could at least help get rid of Allan's body, essentially, and to Luis's surprise, implying that Allan will not only be abducted but also killed imminently. For some reason, Luis agreed to his request and also agreed to meet up 2 days later for what can only be assumed as a post-assignment report. Now, this testimony was huge. It gave further credence to the fact that Kit Alquesa could indeed be the suspect. But the defense did not stop there in trying to cast reasonable doubt on the prosecution's case. At the trial, the biggest issue by the defense, and what they hoped to be their winning card in beating the prosecution's case, was the problematic nature of Centeno's credibility and to some extent Malabanan's as well. Now, you have to understand that even though the justice system of the Philippines is mostly modeled after the common law system of the US, with maybe a hint of civil law from Spain's rule for more than 300 years, criminal trials in the Philippines do not involve a jury. So, the judge is left to evaluate witness testimonies and determine whether there is reasonable doubt from the evidence presented, which in this case involved scrutinizing not only the veracity of the testimonies, but also keeping an eye on the demeanor, presentation, and credibility of a witness. The defense was adamant that Centeno was severely lacking in such credibility. Their main argument was that surely Centeno cannot be trusted to tell the truth since he had signed a total of 3 sworn statements, each with deviating, contradicting details in them. For example, in one statement, Centeno said that they brought Eileen and Allan to a place called CPAMMS or CPAMS. Later on, he changed this and said that indeed they were brought to the Irais farm, a property owned by Mayor Sanchez. Another example, in one statement, Centeno said that he too went to Lavadia's house with Luis Corcolon and personally saw Lavadia and Kit Alquesa and how Lavadia handed an envelope over to Luis, presuming it was money. Now, the trial judge, Judge Demetriou, did not find the defense's argument compelling in this regard. Judge Demetriou maintained that both Centeno and Malabanan gave believable explanations as to the inconsistencies. Centeno explained, for example, that saying the victims were brought to CPAMS was a way of him trying to avoid implicating the mayor, who he hoped would still help him get out of the mess he found himself in at the moment. As for the part where Centeno testified being at the Lavadia residence and seeing Kit Alquesa, Centeno said that an investigator dictated that part of his sworn statement to him, essentially wanting to deflect the attention away from the mayor. At least that was the implication. Judge Demetrio also said that both Centeno and Malabanan gave such detailed testimonies and admirably withstood the cross-examination of 7 defense lawyers, not faltering in their main testimony that Mayor Sanchez was involved in the crimes against Allan and Eileen. It simply did not make sense to the trial judge that both witnesses could so carefully concoct such a detailed narrative with, at least in Centeno's case, and in her opinion, a 6th grade education. This was, I admit, a very classist comment and would probably not fare in 2020 or 2021, as we now know that one's level of education does not really reflect one's intellect and any abilities, but merely shows the lack of opportunities one might have due to poverty or other external circumstances over which a person does not have any control at all. But then again, I guess we would have to take Judge Demetrio's comment in the time and context that it was made. At last, in 1995, Judge Demetrio would later find Mayor Sanchez and the other men guilty of rape with homicide on 7 counts and sentenced them to 7 life sentences. All the men were also ordered to pay civil indemnities to the families of the victims. Of course, the sentenced men did not just let this ruling sit. An appeal was lodged with the Supreme Court that would hopefully mainly convince the highest court in the land that, first and foremost, the testimonies of Centeno and Malabanan should never have been accepted by the trial judge. However, as it turned out, the Supreme Court would later affirm Judge Demetrio's acceptance of Centeno and Malabanan's testimonies and found little to no reason to reject their evidence as state witnesses. But the appellants to the court, Mayor Sanchez and the other men, of course, attempted to poke some more holes in the prosecution's case, which the Supreme Court would later call an act of, and I quote, quibbling. The appellants had, for example, questioned why Centeno could not exactly say where the accused men went after raping Eileen, or whether it was Eileen's right or left foot that hit the chair of the van when she was apparently struggling away from her assailants, or what the speed was when the group drove to UPLB's campus, or what the exact distance was between the Tamarao van and the ambulance when they were driving in convoy. You get the picture. The Supreme Court commented that whilst these inconsistencies could mar Centeno's testimony, they merely referred to trivial details that do not touch upon the whys and wherefores of the crime committed. It was accepted both by the trial court and the Supreme Court that minor inconsistencies in witness testimonies should not necessarily impair the credibility of a witness where the core testimony remains intact. The Supreme Court stated that errorless testimonies are hard to achieve when someone has gone through or has witnessed something harrowing. Slight contradictions are therefore bound to happen. The Supreme Court also reasoned that even if Centeno and Malabanan's testimonies were to be discredited, other pieces of evidence put, at the very least, Eileen at the Erais farm. Now, remember when I told you to put a pin on the information about the white shorts having complete belt loops, the one that was found by the resident and the one that was then given to the mayor? I told you about how apparently Mayor Sanchez was handed a pair of intact white shorts found in Mabacan and how he ordered Medialdea to hand this over to the police major, Major Caño. In reality, the shorts had a missing belt loop, and said belt loop was later then found on the Erais farm. Forensic investigators later confirmed that the belt loop matched the color and fiber composition of Eileen's shorts. Again, this would put Eileen on the Erais farm, as Centeno and Malabanan said. And this information would not confirm or align with the testimony that all the other men, including Mayor Sanchez, had given during the investigation and later on during the trial. Furthermore, an empty bullet shell was recovered near where Allan's body was dumped, and ballistic experts matched those shells with the weapon that Luis Corcolon eventually had to surrender upon his arrest. Lastly, the medical examination on Eileen had shown that there was an overwhelming amount of semen in her, something that no one single man can produce, therefore leading the medical officer to conclude that she was more likely than not gang raped. Of course, this was viewed in conjunction with the other injuries that Eileen had sustained during her horrible ordeal. The trial judge and later on the Supreme Court would also point out that the timeline of the accused men were so similar that they all conveniently started doing something else at the time when Centeno said they were abducting Eileen, raping Eileen, and killing both Allan and Eileen. It all seemed too convenient, too coincidental that their stories started to diverge just at the point when the crimes were said to have been committed. At this point, the appellants had all but exhausted their arsenal. At the Supreme Court, one of the last claims by Mayor Sanchez and the other men was that they never had a fair shot at a trial due to the massive media sensation this case had generated. However, even this claim was quickly dismissed by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said that it was inevitable and remains inevitable that trial judges are exposed to the regular news cycle about big criminal cases. However, the Supreme Court also did not accept that such exposure could affect a trial judge's impartiality. Now, to some extent, I agree with this. I mean, if you are a trial judge, you are not expected to live like a hermit, cut away from current affairs and what is happening in the outside world. It is really just a decision to remain fair and impartial in order to do one's job as a trial judge. But to say that such an exposure could not affect a trial judge's impartiality is a bit absolutist from the Supreme Court, so I do not completely agree. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it is all based on a professional trust being placed in a trial judge to do whatever they can to remain impartial, because not being impartial could destroy lives and really delegitimize the law and the standing of a judge and the whole court system. Eventually, the Supreme Court affirmed the trial judge's ruling and sentences. So what happened since the Supreme Court decision? In 2001, Mayor Sanchez and the other sentenced men filed a motion for reconsideration with the Supreme Court, raising some, if not all, the issues they had already raised 2 years before. Again, the Supreme Court affirmed the trial court's decision. Sanchez and the others were to serve a total of 360 years in prison. The Sarmenta Gomez rape slay, as it would be known in popular culture, slowly faded from people's memories as the years went on. New crimes were committed and are being committed every day, and the media decides every day what to hype and what to sensationalize. However, in 2006 and 2010, Antonio Sanchez grabbed the headlines again after being caught with illicit drugs in prison. These bursts in publicity were short-lived and seemed to not have been very memorable. However, that would change in 2019. In August 2019, the names Eileen Sarmenta, Allan Gomez, and Antonio Sanchez were suddenly catapulted into the present Filipino consciousness yet again. According to a report obtained by several media outlets, the government had green-lighted Sanchez's release. The document was specifically signed by the Bureau of Corrections Chief Nicanor Feldon. Feldon, however, denied any knowledge of this document and maintained that he did not sign anything that would approve Sanchez's release. This seemed odd since Sanchez's family were informed of his release and were asked to prepare to pick him up from New Bilibid prisons. As it turned out, Sanchez was one of many inmates being considered for release due to a so-called good conduct time allowance provision. Over 2,000 inmates who had committed heinous crimes had been released already between 2014 and 2019. However, the news of Sanchez potentially being released sparked outrage among Filipinos. Not only did Eileen's mother express her intention to appeal Sanchez's release, but she also received a lot of support from Filipinos all over the country and the diaspora. Students from UPLB and the women's rights group Gabriela protested against this impending release. Still in August, President Rodrigo Duterte ordered Feldon and other involved government officials to refuse the release of Sanchez. The protests and the public outcry forced the government to essentially set up a committee probe not only into this approved release of Sanchez, but also the good conduct time allowance provision being implemented at the New Bilibid prisons. By September 2019, President Rodrigo Duterte had fired Feldon over his approval of Sanchez's release. The committee probe also recommended that charges be filed against Feldon and other prison officials. As of date, we know that George Medialdea, Rogelio Corcolon, and Zuilo Ama have all died in prison, and Antonio Sanchez, Luis Corcolon, Pepito Kawit, and Baldwin Brion all remain in prison serving their 7 life sentences. It seems that the public outcry and the protests over the impending release of Mayor Sanchez made quite the difference and forced the hand of the government to side with the people. I can only imagine the relief that was felt both by the Sarmenta and Gomez families over the news that Antonio Sanchez and the others would remain in prison and would sit their life sentences. It is hard enough to have lost one's child, but to see how maybe a government could just willy-nilly approve the release of their child's murderers and rapists must be such a hard thing to confront. That concludes our story. I promise that I will not always cover such big cases unless you want me to, so make sure that you DM me or comment as to what you want to hear. I like doing deep dive into cases now and then, and I hope that this level of research, detail, and narration resonate with you. Again, please make sure to send any query or comments to any of the Lagim social media accounts. You can find us on Instagram at Lagim Podcast, on Twitter at Lagim Pod, and on Facebook, just search for Lagim as Filipino True Crime Podcast. I have signed up for TikTok, as I probably already mentioned, and have created some content under Lagim Podcast, but I am still unsure what the best kind of content is for marketing a podcast. But content creation is a dynamic learning process, so I bet I will come up with something. If you're interested in looking up the resources I used to research this episode, make sure to click on the bio on our Lagim's Insta page. This will then lead you to a menu of other links. The first one will then take you to a blog which lists all the links, all the resources that I have used in researching not only this episode, but the other episodes as well. So if you are wanting to read more details about the testimonies of the other men that were sentenced in this case, that would be there as well. I think there are also some YouTube links in there because there was a lot of reporting going on about this case. And so there are some YouTube clips that are quite interesting that I have used for the research in this story. And they could be of interest to you as well. Now, I have already mentioned that I am very much considering starting a YouTube channel to put the episodes on YouTube as well. So those who do not want to listen to Lagim sort of as a podcast on podcasting platforms can then go on YouTube to listen and stream the episodes from there. So watch this space. That will be announced on our Instagram page as soon as that is set up. Again, thank you for listening. Tune in next time in about 2 weeks' time, as always, for another true crime story. Maraming salamat at mabuhay.